To start with, I'm going to talk about why these things that we call mobile phones aren't really mobile.
I've got one in my pocket right now. They are definitely mobile. So what do you mean?
So if you look at the design of most mobile phones, most smartphone applications, it's all designed so that when you use them, you kind of look down at them, you tap away with your fingers. Every time you actually interact with this device, you're supposed to stop, have a look at it, you touch the screen. So it's kind of, I guess I call this stop to interact.
There are some good apps out there. I mean, I've used Strava and Runkeeper and some of these apps that are developed for people who are running around or on bike rides, and they seem to be pretty good. I mean, you go for a run with Runkeeper and it tells you what your pace is, you know, how fast you're going, all this sort of stuff, and you can get them to give you directions and all sorts.
Yeah, so there are good examples of these apps. There are good examples of design for it, particularly when you're looking at designing for very specific situations, or when you're looking for designing for situations that aren't too extreme. If you look at a lot of these apps, so if you look at Runkeeper, for example, almost all the interaction is done when you're stopped. Things really break down once people start actually wanting to interact back with a system in any way other than running a little bit faster or slower. I do a lot of sports. I'd say there's a real benefit to doing physical activity, to doing exercise, to running around, to moving, to cycling. What I'm arguing for here is the design of what I call interaction in motion. So how can you design systems which are usable while you are performing some kind of locomotion? So while you were cycling, while you're driving, while you're running, while you're swimming, while you're skydiving, just anything really. You've always got two things happening. Here is a person and they're moving in some way. I'll call that the locomotion.
There's a song coming to mind here, Joe. I'm going to attempt not to sing it.
So they're doing some kind of movement. They're running, they're cycling or whatever. But at the same time, they're doing some kind of interactive activity with a piece of technology. On this diagram, we have two axes. The inhibition, so how much does your movement inhibit the ability to interact? So if you're walking, that would be kind of somewhere down here. It wouldn't be very much. It would be low. So walking would be kind of somewhere down here. As you went up, so if you started running, it's much harder actually to interact with devices if you run. Then if you look at more extreme things, if you're rock climbing, it could be really hard. The kind of most difficult thing that I can think of to build systems for is swimming. If you're trying to interact with a device while you're swimming, pretty much everything is stopped. Everything is blocked. Your legs are always behind you. Your body is always flat. A lot of the time, you have to actually kind of move your arms in particular patterns. So your arms have to be in particular places, so you can't use those very much. You really can only see a tiny bit of space just in front of your eyes. You can't use speech recognition interfaces because your mouth is underwater. And there's often actually a lot of noise, so even if you use headphones, it's actually very hard to hear with all the kind of splashing going on. So swimming just really strongly kind of inhibits what you can do from a design point of view. Looking at this bottom axis here, I have what's the relation between our two tasks. So we've got our movement activity, which is walking or whatever. We've also got the interactive task. So how related are these? If you think about a smartwatch, if you've got a smartwatch, a lot of the things that does, it kind of shows you notifications. So it says, somebody's sent you an email. So if you're using a smartwatch while you're running along, that's not really related at all. So your smartwatch would be right over here somewhere. Whereas if you're using something like a sat-nav in a car, that kind of directly relates to how you're moving. It kind of responds to how you're moving, where you're going, and so that's really strongly related. Beyond that, you have systems which actually kind of really encourage your movement. So if you look at exercise systems, there's these things called exertion games. They will say, now go faster, now go slower. They're making the movement activity happen. With these two axes, how might you design for interaction in motion? I'm going to split this into 4 quadrants here. In this corner, we're designing essentially general solutions for things. So movement that's going on isn't really related to what the interaction is. So this is things like smartwatches, Google Glass, that kind of thing. it's just, maybe it's just showing you notifications or something, notifications to your emails. But as well as that, we're not expecting people to do anything too extreme. The solutions for this might be pretty basic stuff like make the buttons a little bit bigger, or use speech interfaces if you're doing things where speech is going to be possible. So this area is roughly the limit of what most kind of mainstream design is for. I'm going to talk about this area next. When you're talking about quite extreme activities, so like swimming or skydiving or something like that, so something pretty intense that takes a lot of your concentration, takes a lot of your physical ability away, and if you're designing something that's strongly related to that activity, you can really kind of tailor solutions for a specific activity. For example, there are a couple of interactive systems for swimming which basically focus on a single problem, which is the kind of key problem of swimming outdoors in races, is swimming in a straight line. They are specialized interfaces that they kind of detect, is someone swimming in a straight line, and say, okay, no, you should be going to the right a bit, and show you a little light in your goggles so you can see it. There are specific camera triggers that you can buy for skydiving, which actually sit inside your mouth, because that's the only interaction surface you can kind of reliably control. In this corner, you've got your movement activity as something that has a lot of inhibitions. You're saying, okay, I'd like to design something for that kind of situation, but I'd like it to be, let people do things that aren't really related to the situation, so read their emails or whatever. Slightly dramatically, I call this the danger zone. The most common way to design for this situation currently is if you look at driving and sat-navs. It's the same example. The most common way to design for this is actually to enforce people stopping to interact. So a lot of sat-navs won't let you interact with them. They'll turn off their controls while you're moving. There are some other ways which are sort of starting to come in. In cars with touchscreens, you can't look at a touchscreen. It's hard to touch controls, but various people have been looking at using gestures on touchscreens, like if you use 3 fingers and you slide it down, that changes the volume. If you use 2 fingers and you slide it down, maybe that does your air conditioning. So ways of making these touchscreen interfaces possible to use without looking at them. This is where it's really hard, and you really need to think, is it worth doing? Should I just design my system so people stop? In this corner, we've got things which are strongly related to the movement, but actually the movement you're doing isn't really constraining things. Is the design any different from over here? What you can do with design here is primarily kind of aesthetic things. As a kind of interesting example of that, there's a game by Niantic Labs which is called Ingress, and in that you have to kind of go to places in real life to sort of capture, they call them portals, so you capture kind of energy in real places, and there's kind of thousands of people around the world playing this. But at no point do you actually really need to run fast or drive or anything at the same time. So actually their interface really, it's just kind of, it's a classic kind of stop to interact interface. But a really interesting thing about their interface is that they've got this, it's kind of like a scanner. So it's like something out of Star Trek. You're kind of, in Star Trek, you'd kind of see people, scanning people like that, scanning things like that. And visually it's very much designed to fit in with that idea that this could be some kind of Star Trek type device. This area, I've called it flexible location-based design, because your interaction is quite strongly related to what the person is doing in terms of moving, but there aren't really many constraints on how they can interact.
Is this just stuff that's evolved organically, do you think? Do you think we need to put a lot more thought into this rather than just letting people just kind of build apps on the fly with no knowledge of what they're doing and user interface?
I think we could build better apps if people who were building apps paid attention to what people who are using apps actually do with them in real life in terms of moving. Your whole body twists about 50 to 60 degrees. And when you look at the magnetometer readings, you get something that looks like this graph here. You can see here it's still got...
Slightly less naive, still a bad idea, is you take that password and you encrypt it. So you